Hey, thank you very much. I very much appreciate the opportunity to speak with you today and share some thoughts on privacy. I wish I could have been there in person, but unfortunately we'll have to make do with a video conference today. I wanted to talk briefly today about some developments in technology and how that impacts privacy and how we should be thinking about privacy. And then at the end, talk a little bit about the path forward. You know, as we all are aware, today we are living in a time of really profound technological change and innovation. We see that in our daily lives. We see that in our professional lives. Just the way we interact with technology and computers and everything that's happened in recent years. There's a couple of trends that are worth particularly calling attention to that have some very significant implications on privacy. The first is really the fact that there is ubiquitous computing and data collection. It's not just sitting in front of a desktop computer anymore and using a keyboard. It is mobile devices, tablets, and laptops, and computing terminals in various interactions through retail, through toll bridges, through a variety of sensors that are collecting information about us as we go about our daily lives. And all of these collect and capture data that can be used for various purposes. We interact in different ways. Again, it's not just a keyboard, but there's touch and there's gesture and there's biometrics, different ways of authenticating to computing systems and technology systems. And so the way we interact, the data that's captured from us as a result of that has changed and raises new privacy questions and concerns. A huge issue that's been discussed widely in the last several years is the use of cloud computing, and not just the traditional online services that we've used for a number of years, but significant migrations of business and enterprise systems into the cloud. That raises very, very interesting and important issues. And then the rise of big data as a result of all this information and services moving into the cloud. Massive amounts of data are collected today. There's an interesting statistic that 90% of the data that's been collected in the history of the world has been collected in something like the last 18 months. It's quite amazing how just the volumes of data that are collected now and what those can be used for very important uses, very innovative uses of using medical information to discover new interactions between drugs and different treatments and how that can affect public health. Analysis of big data that's used to improve products of various types. Analyzing data through traffic cameras to improve traffic flows through a city. Lots of very interesting and innovative uses for this data, but also some very concerning potential uses as well. And then more and more, we're seeing personalized and social experiences. The rise of Facebook and other social networks, professionals networking, personal networking has really taken off in quite amazing ways in the last several years. And just the amount of information that people are voluntarily sharing and that's being put out there and being used perhaps in ways that people don't fully understand also raises a number of important issues. So with all this data that's collected, people seemingly voluntarily turning over huge amounts of information about themselves, photos, other data. One could ask the question, and many people have asked the question, does privacy still matter? Is it even relevant today? Are we concerned and worrying ourselves about something that people just don't really care about anymore? Well, we've looked at that issue, and I think the answer is clear, that privacy does still matter. Privacy is perhaps even more important than ever today in light of all those technological changes that I've just mentioned. When we look at the data, we see that it does matter to consumers. A study from the Pew Research Organization last year showed that 30% of consumers had uninstalled an app because of privacy concerns, because they realized that app was doing something that they weren't comfortable with. 56% of users did not complete an online purchase because they were concerned about privacy. And we've seen study after study that bears this out. People do care about privacy. And, for many years, we've seen private studies that show that consumers say they care about privacy. We're now seeing more and more studies indicating that users' actions are actually affected by their concerns about privacy. And I think what's clear about this is that consumers do want to share data. They want to get the advantages of technology and services that involve data sharing. They want to be able to connect with people online and share information with their friends or with their professional colleagues or other acquaintances, but they want to have control. They want to decide who they're sharing the information with, and they want to be able to determine how this information will be used. Some people say that this is a generational thing. Does it matter to the younger generations? Again, the studies and the research bear out that it does. It matters to young people as well. Another study more recently from the Pew Research Center showed that of teens, 51% have avoided certain apps due to privacy concerns. 26% have uninstalled an app because of privacy concerns. And 46% have turned off location-based services because they were worried about the privacy implications of having that on. That indicates that young people are thinking about privacy. They are concerned about it, and they're taking action to protect their privacy. We know that privacy matters to businesses and enterprises. We see that in our interactions with them as we are selling cloud services to businesses and enterprises and asking them to trust us with the data that they would put into the cloud services. And we're seeing that increasingly businesses are being very thoughtful about weighing the many benefits of moving into the cloud with the risks. And they're being thoughtful about that, and they're discussing them, and they are negotiating terms in the contracts to address that. Many businesses have their own regulatory obligations and their own promises that they've made to their customers. And they need to ensure that if they're using a cloud service provider, that cloud service provider is not doing anything that would be contrary to those obligations that they have. They want to know how cloud service providers are accessing and using their data. And sometimes the contracts are not very clear about that. We've seen this as a request from customers. They want to know how their data is being used. They want to know if we're using the data only to provide the service to them, or if we're then taking their data and doing other things to make money from it, whether it's advertising or marketing. Those issues are important to businesses and enterprises, and they should be. Data security, obviously, is an essential component of this. Customers of cloud services are asking what certifications the cloud service provider has, whether they have ISO certifications or others, and whether they have documented information security programs that the customers can see and understand what protections are being put in place to ensure that the customer's data is being protected when it moves into the cloud. And we also know that privacy matters to regulators and governments. More and more jurisdictions are adopting privacy laws. This chart shows the number of countries that have adopted data protection laws over the last several decades. And we've gone from a very few number of countries in the 70s and 80s up to most countries having them today. And we see that trend continuing going forward. In addition to more and more privacy laws being passed, we are also seeing more and more governments enforcing existing privacy laws and stepping up their ability to enforce them with new tools and new resources. In the EU, across many countries, across Germany, France, Spain, Netherlands, others, we're seeing more and more enforcement of the privacy laws that have been put in place for a number of years. We're seeing many long-term investigations where they're digging deep into the practices of companies to ensure that those companies are meeting their legal obligations and the promises that they've made to consumers, and coming up with recommendations and requirements on those companies to make changes to conform with European law and obligations. Similarly, in the United States, we are seeing more and more enforcement. We've had nearly 100 enforcement actions resulting in consent orders on companies since 1999, and the vast majority of those have been in more recent years as the FTC has become more and more active in ensuring that companies are protecting data appropriately. Here in the United States, we were surprised and pleased mostly. I think certainly we were pleased to see our president in the State of the Union address, which is one of the most important speeches he gives every year, specifically call out privacy. And I'll just read this quote because I think it's so important and speaks directly to the things that we've been talking about today so far. And President Obama said, "One thing should be clear. Even though we live in a world in which we share personal information more freely in the past, we must reject the notion that privacy is an outmoded value." I think that sums up perfectly what we're seeing in the data about what consumers and businesses care about. I think it sums up the fact that although times are changing, although technology is changing, although the uses and the sharing and the production of data has increased dramatically, privacy is just as important today as it has been. So how do we think about privacy in this era of ubiquitous data collection and massive amounts of data being collected and massive amounts of data being shared in various ways? Well, we need to think about this in a balanced way. We need to make sure that we can protect privacy in an appropriate way while not undermining the benefits that data and these technological innovations have brought us. We want to make sure that enterprises and consumers can continue to take advantage of cloud computing resources because there are enormous efficiency benefits there. It makes much more computing power, storage, etc., available to businesses that would not otherwise be able to afford that on their own. It allows for more rapid innovation and updating, and there are security benefits as well. Not every small or medium enterprise can afford to have world-class security expertise on staff that the major cloud computing vendors can. And so you get advantage of the latest security technologies and processes as well. And so we want to make sure that people are comfortable moving into the cloud and that companies aren't being overly aggressive in using that customer's data. They should focus on cloud computing services that respect the ownership of data. It's the customer's data. They are stewards of the data, not owners of the data. And by having that kind of balanced approach, we can protect privacy and continue to allow for these services to flourish and thrive. We want to make sure that people are still able to, share their photos with their grandchildren, and have these rich, social, personalized experience that people have come to expect and want. It provides real value when an online service you're using actually does know something about you and can, give you the local weather rather than making you always type in your zip code or your postal code or your city or region. There's a lot of value here, but we need to make sure that privacy is built in a privacy by design methodology to ensure that privacy is protected as we are collecting and using data for these purposes. As we look at what the framework is for the rules of the road and the guidelines around privacy, our view is that no one approach is satisfactory. Regulation by itself is not enough. Self-regulation by itself is insufficient. Individual companies may innovate and provide market-based solutions to privacy, but they are narrow slices and they don't provide broad-based privacy protections across the board. So we think we need a combination. Governments, legislation, regulation, and enforcement has a very important role in protecting privacy. It sets the baseline. It ensures that all consumers, all businesses are protected by at least a minimal bar of privacy protection. But legislation and the legislative process can be slow to adapt to new technologies. And so self-regulation can provide a useful layer on top of that to provide a set of rules that may be specific to a particular industry or that can adapt more rapidly to new technologies or new business models. And so legislation and self-regulation can work together to provide a more complete approach to protecting privacy. And then we should encourage companies to come up with new ways of protecting privacy. We should encourage innovation in this space in the same way we should encourage innovation in other areas. There's a lot of interesting research and academic work and company innovation in the privacy space and in the security space, and that should be encouraged by a flexible approach to regulation and self-regulation that allows innovation to thrive. At Microsoft, we have looked at these issues over the years, and we don't have all the answers ourselves. We are certainly involved in a lot of areas of technology. We're involved in almost all of those areas I mentioned before. We have a mobile operating system. We hope it gets more market share in the future, but the Windows Phone is out there. Obviously, on the desktop, consumer services, we are doing a lot. We are very involved in enterprise services and enterprise cloud computing. We have a gaming platform with Xbox. And so we're out there doing a lot of stuff. And so we've been thinking about privacy from a lot of different perspectives. But we don't have all the answers. And so we try to work with others to think about how we can move the discussion around privacy forward. Last year, we convened a number of regional meetings of stakeholders in privacy, including people in companies, government leaders, academics, and privacy people in consumer and privacy NGOs to come together and talk about the best way forward to think about privacy and what public policy should look like moving forward. And some of the conclusions that came out of that, it's obviously not everybody had the exact same viewpoints, but there were some common threads of thought that came out about looking at privacy moving forward. A lot of the consensus was about the things that we already talked about. Technology is moving forward, but privacy still matters. But we need to evolve our privacy frameworks, whether they're the legal frameworks or the self-regulatory frameworks, or just how we think about them as players in the market, as companies and service providers, that we need to focus more on the use of data. All this data is being collected, sometimes passively, sometimes actively, as there are cameras and sensors and all kinds of ways that data is collected. It's no longer realistic to think that the way to approach privacy is to always flash a privacy notice in front of somebody and ask them to tick a box. People would spend their whole lives reading privacy notices and ticking boxes if that were the case. So we need to think about ways like, how do we protect data where that's not a realistic approach? And so focusing on what the appropriate uses of data are. I talked about that a little bit in the context of cloud computing. An appropriate use of data when an enterprise is entrusting data to a cloud computing service provider is to use the data on behalf of the customer, to recognize that it's the customer's data and they own the data, and that uses like mining that data for other purposes, for advertising or other things, is not an appropriate use of data. We need to ease the burden on individuals. Again, the notice and consent approach often puts all of the burden on the individual. It puts all of the responsibility for understanding what the company's doing and making choices on the individual. And again, people would spend their entire lives doing that if that were the predominant model going forward. And it needs to be flexible enough to accommodate the unforeseeable. Oftentimes, when data is collected, you don't know the value of that data at the time it's collected. Sometimes, and I see this a lot in discussions around medical data, the research and the insights that one can get from analyzing large amounts of anonymized medical data, the researchers wouldn't have even conceived of that at the time the data was collected. And so we need to make sure that there's some flexibility to accommodate unforeseen uses of data with privacy protections in place, of course, whether that's anonymization techniques, strong security, other forms of transparency. It's not a free pass anybody's suggesting, only that the regimes are flexible enough to protect privacy while allowing for unforeseen uses of data. And again, government action is important here. Governments play a crucial role in protecting privacy of both consumers and enterprises, along with self-regulation and market innovation. I know we're running a little bit late, so with that, we'll stop, and hopefully we have a little bit of time for questions. Thank you very much again for the opportunity to talk with you today. I very much appreciate it. And I don't know if I can hear the questions, or are they going to be typed in the IM window?
Abrimos espacio para preguntas. Si pueden hacerlas en inglés o en español y las traducimos. Las preguntas van a ser traducidas y aparte van a ser escritas en la computadora. Así que les pedimos como que sean como que muy concisos para poder escribirlas bien. ¿A dónde? Muy concisos y claros para poder escribirlas.
Yes, I can.
Tu nombre, por favor.
My name is Juan Jose. I'm a student in Mexico. Do you think encryptation can fight against massive surveillance? And what other technological options can be there for fighting this issue, and that's all.
Para escribirla.
Do you think encryption can fight massive surveillance? And what other technological options do we have? And is there any limit about when PCs become faster? I mean the processors against encryption?
I had a hard time making that out. Can you repeat it? It's not coming up. I'm sorry. No, it's the last one I have is, sorry, hold on here. Oh, okay, hold on. I needed to increase the size of my window here. Okay. Hi, how are you? I'm reading the question now. The question is, do you think encryption can fight the massive surveillance? And what other technology options do we have? Yeah, the government surveillance questions are very interesting, and encryption can certainly play a role in helping to address that. The encryption between people's computers and cloud services, encryption within networks can certainly help thwart those kinds of interceptions. Now, when the revelations came out over the summer around the spying by the U.S. government, we looked at those issues very, very closely. Unfortunately, by law, we are prohibited from talking about some of the aspects of that, but what we can talk about is that some of the allegations that were made appear to not be entirely accurate. Not to say that there isn't massive amounts of government surveillance going on. It's quite clear that there is. But these programs suggesting a backdoor with the cooperation of companies, that's certainly not something that we at Microsoft have done. We do get requests from governments subject to legal process. We try to be as transparent about those as we possibly can. We've issued reports on the number of requests we get, and we push back on those requests. And you can see in those reports that not every request gets a response. Not every request gets the response that the government is seeking. And oftentimes there's a negotiated response, and something less than what they're originally coming to us with a request for is what's turned over. The more troubling part of these allegations is the surveillance that's happening in complete secrecy, without transparency, without accountability. And to the extent that governments, and I have to point out, it's not just the U.S. government that's engaged in these activities. There's many governments around the world that are certainly collecting large amounts of data in these contexts. That's something that we need to address. And encryption is a possible solution. Now, it's not a complete solution. And there's several reasons for that. One of which is that while the data can be encrypted in transit and should be, many of the services that people want, that they're putting data in the cloud for, involve different types of processing on data. And I'll just give one example. in an email service. Part of the service is filtering out spam and malware and other mail that the recipient doesn't want. If that mail were encrypted through the entire pipe, the service provider would be unable to analyze that to be able to weed out the bad mail from the good mail. So there are going to be inevitably places where data is going to be unencrypted, and that presents a weakness in the system, quite honestly. But through strong security measures, strong policies, and strong legal protections, and we have advocated for stronger restrictions on government access to data. That has to be the solution. It has to be a multifaceted solution. Okay.
Bueno, hola, Juan Carlos Castañeda, de México. Te voy a hacer mi pregunta en español, aunque la están ahorita trasladando al inglés. Mi pregunta es, ¿qué tanto ha afectado hoy en día al trabajo de la NCA sobre el espionaje y la vigilancia que ejerce esta agencia a espaldas de Barack Obama, que Obama no conocía a detalle lo que hacía esta agencia? ¿Qué tanto ha afectado las relaciones entre los estados y la desconfianza que se ha generado respecto a esas actividades que hoy salen a la luz pública?
Yeah, the question on governments spying on each other is that goes back as far as there has been governments. I don't have much to say on that other than our main concern is protecting the privacy and security of the data that entities are entrusting us with, and we do provide cloud services to government entities. So to that extent, it is something that we would be very concerned about. And my sense is that when governments are spying on each other, they don't want to go to private sector entities and say, please, can we have this data? They're going to do it through more secretive means. The best we can do in our approach is to ensure that our systems are secure and that our systems aren't letting anybody in, whether it's a government or a hacker or a thief, into our systems through any vulnerabilities, and we are watching that and working to stay up to date on the latest security precautions every single day. And that's about as much as I can say about that one.
Muy buenas tardes, Héctor Castañeda. Y la pregunta es, ¿por qué debe el gobierno ser quien, por qué debe ser el garante en la protección de los datos ciudadanos? Si es en este caso es su mejor cliente y al final de cuentas es parte del servicio que ustedes le están ofreciendo, la protección de los datos en algunos casos. La empresa que representa.
¿Me podrías repetir la última parte de la pregunta? Es que no alcancé a escucharla toda.
So why should the government be the watcher of private data? I'm not certain I understand the question. I mean, we certainly do provide services to certain governments. We provide cloud services to schools and universities. We provide cloud services to different government agencies around the world. And in that case, the government is our customer, just as it is when we provide cloud service to any business or individual consumers. And we take protecting that data as seriously as we do protecting the data of any private sector client. But at the same time, government also plays a role as the body that creates law and enforces law. And the point I was making is that that's an important role for them to play. Mexico adopted a new data protection law, I think it was last year. The government has an important role to enforcing that law and making sure that companies like Microsoft and others are adhering to those legal requirements. Now, that's not to say that the legal requirements that governments impose on us with respect to the data we're holding on behalf of consumers and others is the only basis on which we develop our privacy policies. Our privacy policies, in most cases, go above and beyond the baseline legal requirements because we think that trust is essential for customers to want to use our services. And so we have adopted policies and we have marketed policies that try to demonstrate to our customers, whether it's individual consumers or large companies, that we have adopted strong rules to protect privacy and that we have put in enormous investments in protecting the security of data. So no, the government is not the sole entity that's protecting data. We think that we have a crucial role as well, and often that's market driven. We think that privacy is something that we can stand for in the market, and that it's something that our customers really do care about.
¿Alguna otra pregunta? ¿No? No, yo tengo el...
Thank you.